In the early hours of September the 1st, 1973, fire swept through the Hafnia Hotel, a small but popular historic hotel in the heart of the Danish capital, Copenhagen. Although the fire brigade were on scene within minutes, the fire was already ravaging the upper floors of the hotel. Fire brigade investigators declared that this was a case of arson, but it would be 13 years before anyone was convicted of Denmark's deadliest hotel fire, and even then, doubts linger as to whether they actually got the right man. Designed by architect Philip Smith, the Hafnia Hotel was part of a four-winged complex built around a small central courtyard located at number 23 Vestervoldgade. Completed in 1899, it remained a popular choice for guests wanting affordable accommodation in the heart of the historic Danish capital. And by the early 1970s, the hotel was probably long past its halcyon days. But nevertheless, the charming little hotel, with its air of faded grandeur, remained busy throughout the year. However, not everyone was happy about the conditions inside. Ed Schiller, a reporter working at the time for Reuters in Copenhagen, remembered checking the place out, as his mother was coming for a visit, and she'd booked the Hafnia for her accommodation during the trip. So I strolled over to the Hafnia to make a personal inspection. What I found was highly disturbing. The hallways were barely wide enough for two people to pass, and as far as I could tell, there were no fire escapes. Schiller wasn't alone in having reservations about the hotel. Danish fire officials had long complained that the Hafnia was a fire trap. The rear of the hotel ringed a very small courtyard which would act as a chimney for fire, and this was inaccessible to fire engines with ladders. The building had no fire alarm, no automatic sprinkler installation, and no fireproof doors or fire escapes. Although the Hafnia occupied 5 floors and its rooms were spread over several wings of the complex, most of the corridors were dead ends, the central stairwell being the only manner of entry or exit. However, as it stood, the Hafnia met the required fire regulations of the time, and so it remained open for business. In the early hours of the morning of September the 1st, 1973, a fire started in the kitchenette located on the second floor. This small fire quickly spread to the wood panelling and carpets in the adjacent hallway. As previously mentioned, the hallway doors were not fireproof, and in any case, most of them had been wedged open to allow unimpaired access for guests and staff, and to allow air to circulate through the building. Because of this, the fire spread quickly to the main stairwell, and flames began to lick upwards to the floors above. Unfortunately, the wooden panelling in the stairwell had been varnished with nitrocellulose lacquer. This lacquer was durable and gave the wood a nice deep sheen, but it was also highly flammable, and when set alight, it emitted extremely hot toxic gas. By now, some of the guests on the lower floors had been awoken by the sound of crackling and the smell of smoke. Realising that the hotel was on fire, they'd managed to alert the local fire brigade, who were there within just 3.5 minutes. But despite the rapid response time, it was already too late to get the fire under control. Once the flames had reached the central stairwell, the fire was intensified by the natural updraft, and the flames and hot toxic gases shot upwards. The accumulation of these hot flammable gases in the upper part of the central stairwell resulted in a flashover. A fire explosion which instantaneously sent flames, smoke and toxic gas along the corridors of the upper 3 floors. Due to this action of the central stairwell acting like a chimney combined with the explosive flashover, the staff in reception were seemingly unaware of any problem until most of the rear of the building and the top floors of the hotel were on fire. The guests in these upper rooms were now trapped in dead-end corridors, and climbing out of the windows was pretty much the only option for any chance of escape. By the time the fire brigade got to the hotel, flames were already shooting from the windows of the upper floors, and the whole front of the building was crawling with terrified guests who had climbed out of the windows and were clinging precariously to the ledges and balconies. The rear section of the hotel was on fire too, and the small interior courtyard was acting as a chimney, funneling the flames up and over the rear of the hotel. For anyone still trapped on the upper floors, time was rapidly running out. Chambermaid Mary Sheehan, who was living in staff quarters on the top floor, remembered the moment her colleague woke her up. "It was the middle of the night. My roommate shook me awake, screaming that the hotel was on fire. She was frantic. She said we had to get out of the room. She wanted me to go with her into the hallway, but I could smell smoke and I saw smoke coming under the door. I shouted, "No, no, don't go to the door. We must go out the window and climb onto the roof. It's the only way." But she said that she was afraid of heights and insisted on going out of the door. I pleaded with her not to, but she opened the door and ran into the hallway. I wanted to stop her, but I couldn't. I don't see how she could have survived. Mary's roommate did indeed perish. Firemen found her body just a few feet from the room. She most likely collapsed within seconds and died from toxic smoke inhalation. Mary was luckier. She managed to climb out of the window, crawl along a narrow ledge and get up onto the roof. However, she was trapped and the flames below were only getting closer. Fortunately, somebody working late in the Politiken newspaper building, which also faced onto the rear of the courtyard, someone saw her, and the firemen managed to span a ladder over the courtyard and rescue her just minutes before that whole section of roof caught fire and collapsed. With the rear courtyard being basically inaccessible, there was little the fire brigade could do apart from pluck as many people as they could from the roadside windows and ledges and get them down to safety. Getting inside to fight the fire was almost impossible, as parts of the building were already beginning to collapse. By the time dawn was breaking, the fire had been brought under control, although a large part of the hotel had been completely burned out. Of the 90 guests that were booked into the Hafnia, 35 had perished. Among that number were whole families who had died together. There were also dozens of others injured, suffering from burns and lung damage due to the smoke. Fire investigators very quickly announced that this was arson, and within hours police had arrested a Danish man, Bent Willy Nielsen. He was one of the wounded guests from the hotel, who earlier on had been seen arguing in reception about the cost of his room, and later on in hospital had been overheard muttering, "It's awful, it's all my fault." However, with no actual proof or forthcoming confession, Bent Willy Nielsen was released and the police investigation into who was responsible for Denmark's deadliest hotel fire went cold. And it remained cold for the next 13 years, until police arrested this man, serial arsonist and pyromaniac Erik Solbakke Hansen. Erik Solbakke Hansen had been arrested in December 1985, caught red-handed trying to set fire to a train carriage at the Hillerud train station. The 38-year-old quickly confessed to being the one responsible for starting several other major fires which had plagued the North Zealand area, fires which had burned down factories and warehouses. These blazes had claimed the lives of one fireman and a 22-year-old woman. Hansen also astounded officers by then confessing to the murder of 15-year-old Annette Thompson, another unsolved case which dated back to 1980. According to his own testimony, while he was on holiday on the island of Fano, he spotted 15-year-old Annette Thompson sunbathing on the beach. He had become aroused and tried to seduce the girl, who understandably told him to get lost. Hansen, feeling rejected, hit her in the head with a brick before strangling her. He then put a towel over the girl's head and left. Passers-by who saw Annette's body on the beach thought that she was just sunbathing, and it was poor Annette's father, worried about her long absence, who eventually discovered her body. As if that wasn't enough, Hansen then confessed to being the person who started the fire at the Hafnia Hotel. Now, this was the breakthrough the police had been waiting for all these years. Denmark's deadliest case of arson was finally solved. The confession brought Hansen's death toll to at least 38 victims, making him Denmark's worst ever multiple murderer. Based on his confessions, he was sentenced to life imprisonment at a secure facility for the criminally insane. He died in 1997. Neither his adoptive mother or father came to the funeral. However, as time passed, some were beginning to doubt if Erik Hansen really was the one who started the fire at the Hafnia Hotel. Now, according to the police, it wasn't just his confession, but his intimate knowledge of the crime scene and details known only to the arsonist that convinced them of his guilt. Okay, so for anyone not already familiar with this case, here's the elephant in the room. Erik Solbakke Hansen was, as described in the Danish police reports, mentally retarded. He had the mind of a 6 or 7-year-old child, and he'd been institutionalised for most of his life. As a baby, he'd been abandoned by his biological mother and then adopted, but his new adoptive parents soon realised that Erik was not developing as he should. At school he was an easy target, and his sister said he could always be persuaded by the bigger boys to take the fall for their mischief. As he entered his teens, Erik was admitted to what the Danes termed mentally retarded care, and he lived in a kind of an open institution where you were in care but you could come and go as you pleased. The institution also organised day trips and short holidays for those that were in its care, and it was on one of these institution trips on to the island of Fano that Hansen killed Annette Thompson. But, despite being known for years as Denmark's worst mass killer, there's a consensus of opinion that Erik Hansen may have been allowed to confess to a crime that he didn't actually commit, and that the police detective in charge of the case fed him details to make his confession more secure. Now, Hansen certainly was arrested trying to set fire to the train in Hillerød, and he freely confessed to the factory fires in North Zealand and the murder of Annette Thompson. He definitely was on Fano Island when Annette Thompson was murdered, but that's about all we can say for sure. There was never any forensic evidence connecting Hansen to the murder or the Hafnia fire. It was only his confessions that convicted him. A recent TV documentary series which looked into the case of Erik Solbakke Hansen found several transcripts of his confessions where pertinent details which were not present in the first interview were subsequently present in the second interview. Also, during his time in police custody, Solbakke was mostly interrogated without any lawyer being present. To cap it all off, the TV series also suggested that the fire at the Hafnia Hotel may not have been arson at all, but more likely the result of poorly maintained wiring which caused an electrical fire. Fire investigators did find lots of old wiring, just like this, and paper rubbish bags soaked with old cooking oil that were littered around in the basement. So it seems that the Hafnia wasn't exactly leading the way in cleanliness or health and safety. So, over 50 years after the fire at the Hafnia Hotel, the official version of events still stands. It was arson, and that serial arsonist and so-called sex pyromaniac Erik Solbakke Hansen was the guilty party. For some, he remains Denmark's worst mass murderer. For others, he was innocent, a convenient patsy that the police needed to close the case. Maybe the truth lies somewhere between the two. To be honest with you, personally, I've got absolutely no idea. I'm just here to tell the story. Thanks for watching.